Welcome everyone. I am Gershon. I am the founder of Imperial Advisory. We are a fractional CFO and consulting firm, and we have a team of senior financial executives, and we go into businesses that need our help. And we typically work either for the CFO, so in larger companies, we're helping the CFO, whether it's with bandwidth or some kind of special expertise or working on a project. So in home care, our work has been around, I think, a little bit of M&A and financial planning and analysis and a variety of other things that we've worked on the CFO side over there. And so there's that. And then with smaller companies, we work for the CEO. And we typically come in as a part-time CFO, and we've done that in home care as well as other industries. Now, I mentioned a moment ago, we get involved in M&A, and so on our webinars, our educational webinars, M&A is one of the things that we like to talk about and like to understand, and it's certainly something that has been going on in the home care space. And so we were delighted that Michael agreed to come and join us today to speak to us about M&A in the home care space. Michael's got a lot of experience as a corporate attorney and a specialty in home care, and I'll let him tell you more about himself in a moment. I want to just take a moment to welcome the people from our team who are joining us today. Thank you, Brittany, for putting this together, and welcome Stephanie and Tom, and if we have anyone else I can't see on my screen, then welcome to you as well. There, Dean, welcome, Dean. All right, so, I'm looking forward to learning a lot today. I hope that you'll all learn a lot as well. Hopefully we'll see some of you at the upcoming home care show. Got a little survey, which we'll put up in the middle here to ask you a few questions. If you can answer that, that would be helpful. And we'll send you a short survey after the event as well. Anyway, without further ado, Michael, come introduce yourself, and looking forward to learning a lot from you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Gershon. Thanks to Imperial for connecting and putting this all together. I'm looking forward to a good discussion. I'm hoping, as Gershon mentioned, that we have a little bit more of a back and forth. Maybe I can get through a little bit of the content, and then people can ask questions. Hopefully we'll monitor the chat, so we'll be able to see those, and we'll get to some questions. We'll move forward with content, and we'll do the best that we can to answer questions and get you the most information that you can. Like Gershon said, I've been practicing maybe too long. I've been practicing for about 30 years and primarily as a corporate and transactional attorney. So I've been involved in many transactions on both sides, the buy side and the sell side. So I'm trying to come at this presentation from both angles. Because I think it's a challenging process. It's a process that many people are not fully conversant with, and so we'll talk later about assembling a team and putting in the right pieces so you're able to move forward in the most non-disruptive way to your business. But as I always say when I give a conversation, I'm not giving any legal advice. I don't represent anybody here. Well, maybe I do actually, but this is just for conversation. And as always, anytime you hear information from a lawyer, you should check with your own counsel and get your own team together to run it by and agree, disagree, or get into a conversation. A lot of the topics that we're going to talk about are not necessarily home care, healthcare specific, right? We're talking about a process that is not that applies in any particular industry, right? If somebody's thinking of buying and selling, some of the concepts that we're talking about are going to be important, and we'll layer in some of the more specific home care related issues that you might come across when you're dealing with this environment in the great state of New York. So in terms of getting to the first first idea, first thing that you want to think about is what am I doing, right? Am I buying? Am I selling? Is this the right strategy? What are the thoughts that might come into a buyer or a seller's mindset? And do they have an impact as we go forward? And what's the impact? So if you're, for example, if you're a buyer, what are you looking for, right? Are you an existing company in a particular industry that you're looking to expand your footprint, that you want to be grow yourself through acquisition as opposed to investing and trying to grow organically? In New York, if you're an existing agency, there are ways that we'll talk about in a little bit that will allow you to hopefully make the process and the timing to get to closing go a little bit quicker. But if you are in New York, you know that the New York market is a little bit dysfunctional, a little bit challenged based upon the Department of Health and the issues that they raise, and the amount of time that they can dedicate to moving applications for changes of ownership or just things related to a transaction through their layers of bureaucracy. Um, you know, there are people that look at the market and think, well, okay, home care is interesting because home care, we know that the population generally is aging, and so this is should be nothing but growth opportunity, which may be right, but part of understanding it and in home care is understanding what your potential market is. And what you're looking to, where you're looking to make your money. Are you looking to develop a, concierge, white glove private pay agency, or are you looking for something that is more driven by, let's say, volume and Medicaid reimbursements? So that's something to think about because if you're going to the private pay, you need to be aware of your demographics and where you're setting up your business. If you're looking to take advantage of the Medicaid dollars, you need to know that that is a very challenging environment, and there are multiple layers of additional regulatory requirements that you're going to have to be dealing with. So you have to be thinking about, what's the market, what are the opportunities, and really investigate the market, especially if you're looking into receiving government funds, Medicaid funds for your purposes of your reimbursement, because that you have to really be committed to navigating that process. From a seller standpoint, that could be any number of things. Why are you looking to sell? Is it just because you happen to be in New York and your industry, or in home care especially, you just overloaded with the regulatory requirements that you have to go through. You're tired of looking to having to challenge the reimbursements that you're getting. You're tired of having to be limited in terms of your ability to expand throughout the state. And it's just, or you just want to retire, or you've just gone long enough, and you spent enough time and blood, sweat, and tears in growing your business, and now you think it's a good time to exit, right? And that's another thing you're always thinking about is it more of a buyer's market, or is it more of a seller's market, right? Because those will always have an impact on the the valuation and maybe the potential premium that you might get, even if you're valued at a certain level. We've seen that recently in the home care market in New York, is that some of the valuations have, maybe for no real supported reason, have gone up. Maybe it's a supply and demand issue. But it's something that you have to be thinking about. And if you're a buyer looking to get in, you should really spend a lot of time not just looking at the business that you're buying, but spending time looking at the regulatory environment, right? What's new? Is there new legislation? Is there something new or proposed that's coming down the pike that you might have to deal with, which might impact your ability to realize the return on investment that you're hoping for.
Quick question.
Yeah, of course.
Um, does what's going on with CDPAP cause other types of home care to sell for a premium?
We saw, and it's probably still lingering, but we saw in the run up to what was the initial anticipated transition date of April 1st in the consumer directed program. For those not fully familiar, there was a radical transformation in home care that over the last year or so was pushed through was, you may have seen advertisements in TV and on in media, and know about court cases that are happening and legislative hearings that have gone on to look into, what happened during this whole process. But in essence, there's traditional personal care, which for many years, that was the way that if you were getting services as a home care patient, you would get it through a traditional licensed home care services agency, and you'd get personal care. And then there was always, since the early 70s, a program called the Consumer Directed Personal Assistance Program, which gave some ability for they call consumer, which is really a patient, to be able to control their way they received care. And there were certain allowances in the consumer directed program, for example, that you can have certain relatives as your caregiver, that your caregiver could perform certain tasks that a typical personal care aide was not permitted to perform. And so that kind of in about 2015 became part of a benefit that people on Medicaid were able to receive. It's a Medicaid program. So what happened was that in order to do this, the structure was that there were entities called fiscal intermediaries that would kind of manage the process between the consumers and their caregivers and the plans. And these grew over, so from 2015, I would say there were probably, under 100 fiscal intermediaries. And, as of probably April of this year, the word was that there were over 600. So what the state decided to do was consolidate that. So those 600 were consolidated, 600 fiscal intermediaries were consolidated into a single fiscal intermediary. As you might imagine, that created an enormous backlash, enormous upheaval, disruption, and issues. But so far it's continued, right? There were lawsuits that were attempted. Nothing has really gotten in the way of the state and Governor Hochul's desire to do this. And so we're here now where we've got the single fiscal intermediary, and I don't think it's complete, but the approximately 250 or 280,000 consumers and probably 400 or so thousand personal assistants or caregivers were all transitioned to a single fiscal intermediary. That's the background. In terms of the impact, um, there there is a process by which, if you have consumers and personal assistants, their caregivers, who meet certain criteria and take certain tests, that there was an ability to try to transition a consumer and a PA from a fiscal intermediary over to a licensed agency. So in the run-up, that's what we saw. We saw that there were some people who were exploring that, who were interested in maybe looking into acquiring a licensed agency in order to facilitate this, right? They were at risk, if they stayed as a fiscal intermediary, of essentially losing their business, right? Because they would be cut out once the full transition went through to the single fiscal intermediary. So as a result of that, in the event that there was a licensed agency that came to market or was looking to be sold, you might imagine, from a supply and demand standpoint, there were many more people who were interested in acquiring that business. And so had nothing necessarily to do with valuation. It had to do with scarcity, and whether or not you were able to find something and acquire it. So we did see, I would kind of call it an irrational valuation increase in the months leading up to, and probably still lingers on right now. Maybe the values are dropping down a little bit, but there were, I mean, crazy valuations that had no real basis for anything other than people wanted it and there weren't a lot of them. I don't know if that answers your question, Gershon.
Yeah, I think it does. I think it's yes, because of scarcity and people looking to transition from one type to another, you ended up with much more demand there. And is that a sustained event, or that was kind of a blip that?
I think I was hoping it was more of a, I mean, I guess it depends on which side of the table I'm on, if I'm hoping it's a blip or it's something that clients that are looking to sell are able to capitalize on. But it's challenging because it's really not connected, right? It's not connected to actual any actual metrics that you can look at to say, okay, I'm buying something, I'm getting value to it. And I mean, listen, people are interested, and there were people that came to me and said we want to buy this, and when I asked them what the price was, they came out with crazy numbers, and I blinked and looked at them, and they explained that this is what they felt they needed to do. And I don't know, all the times if people look into it and try to figure out the full business plan and know what their path is to a return on their investment and how successful they're going to be, but sometimes they just move ahead. So
Can I add something to that?
of course.
So when we look at an acquisition, some of the conversation is not just about what are you buying and what was the story yesterday. Some of the conversation is about, or the thought process of the buyer is, what's it going to be tomorrow? And so you might be buying an agency for more than that agency is worth. But if that, in the case you're describing, maybe I have 1,000 patients that I've already spent the time to to acquire and build a relationship with, that I could now service under this new agency. And so I'm overpaying if you just look at the new agency, but if you look at the combined thing, and that enables me to continue to earn money on all these other patients, which otherwise would disappear, that could potentially justify, again, I don't know exactly what prices you're talking about, but
No, I agree with you. I agree with you that, and that's why in thinking about, am I deciding to buy? Am I deciding to sell? If you're deciding to buy, I think it's critical that you have a plan, right? You have a business plan, and you think about the markets that you're going to try to tap into, the accessibility to be able to get certain things. If you said, hey, I want to get into the Medicaid population, that's what I want to do. You should know that in order to service that population, you have to get a contract from a managed long-term care plan, and those they don't give those out like candy to everybody. So it's not a simple process to go through and get a contract. The managed long-term care plans have limitations on the numbers of contracts that they can issue, and so it's really becomes a you know a challenging aspect of it, even though you might say, again, the population is aging. And so people are going to need home care. So this is a growth market. You still need to know what your obstacles to entering into the market are and take that into account, right? And say, I'm not going to plunk down this enormous purchase price only to get frustrated because I'm not able to get the contract that I thought I could get, or even if I get that contract, the amount of cases that I'm getting is really not at the level that will make sense. So it's a long, hard process, I think, and that turns into the next part of what I was wanting to talk about in terms of once you've made that decision, one side or the other, what are your next steps? To me, the next steps are that you're looking to put a team together, right? You want to deal with people who know the industry, who are going to be able to give you some of that insight that I just mentioned in terms of what the future holds, how it looks, right? You don't want to, I mean, clearly maybe I'm a little bit biased, but I think, having an attorney that's familiar with, the multiple parts of what we're talking about here. We're talking about a transaction, right? A sale or a purchase of an entity, which people have a certain background to be able to do that and advise you, or you can pick somebody. I'm sorry. In addition to the corporate standpoint, you've got a highly regulated industry. So you need to know, you need to have somebody who knows and is familiar with that process, right? How do we navigate to get from the earliest stages to a letter of intent, to due diligence, to a purchase agreement, and then ultimately get to a successful outcome with the Department of Health, to get you to the spot of that you actually are now operating as an agency and are in good standing with the Department of Health. So to me, having a legal team that knows how to manage all of those different aspects, I think that you hopefully, if you're in the industry, you're using an accounting firm that is also familiar with the treatment and how the business flows, and knows the different aspects from an accounting standpoint. You have to decide if you want to engage with a broker, right? There are brokers. In my view, there are people who are brokers, or people who are finders, right? A finder might just be familiar with people in the industry and be able to talk to a few people, and will connect the dots between a buyer and a seller. There are brokers that are much more involved. There are brokers that will come in, will assess your business, well, from all different standards, right? Because they've been involved in the industry and they know what to look for, and they will really work with you to get your business in shape to be sold, and will work with you to market it to the potential targets that hopefully that they bring, right? If you're looking to deal with a broker, you should be asking the broker what what are you bringing to the table? Right? Are you and you have to be thinking about what level of service you want from a broker. Um, if you really want somebody that's going to market your business and has contacts in the industry, you have to ask those questions because in my experience, there are a lot of brokers who are more finder-like and are not as much of a value add. But when you are talking with them, definitely ask for their what they are capable of doing and what you're going to expect from them in order to pay them the percentage. Don't just sometimes they just roll out with these boilerplate types of brokerage agreements, which of course as a lawyer, you shouldn't be just signing blindly. You should negotiate to talk about the deliverables that they're going to provide, when the timing of your payment. Right? We don't want to just say well, you're going to get one payment and your entire percentage, because it's usually based upon a percentage of enterprise value or purchase price. You want to be able to know that you're not paying everything once you get a 10% payment on your first payment. That, in my view, shouldn't trigger you getting the broker getting 100% of the brokerage commission. But part of Gershon.
Question.
Yes.
I've heard people in the M&A world, probably brokers, but I've heard people say that even if you know who you want to sell to, you should still involve a broker. And that there, besides for finding you a buyer, there are other things that you really need a broker for. Have you found that to be true? And do you see a difference between industries on that?
I think that can be true, but I think that goes to the vetting of the broker and knowing what their history is, knowing deals that they've been successful on, and interviewing them, right? Not just say, oh, this guy's, I hear his name on the street or her name on the street, and that's the right person that I should go with. I think the value add goes with the experience that the broker brings to the table. Right. And because you can argue the other way and say, if I've had discussions for the last 5 years with so and so, he's interested in buying my business, and so it makes it easy to just go that way. I think probably the initial reaction would be, well, I don't need a broker for that. Why would I pay somebody X% to just put us together when we already know that we could make this work? So I guess it depends on the level of comfort that you have with a potential buyer to think whether to then analyze if you feel as if the broker can add anything to that overall transaction.
Well, I guess besides for more buyers, what would you want the broker to be adding?
You want the broker to basically take a look at your business. They'll sit down, they'll speak with you, they'll speak with your objectives, right? Which could be anything from obviously from getting the highest price to making sure that if you've been in business for a long time and you've got senior staff that you're interested in keeping, making sure that there could be a home for them, right? And trying to figure out, we talk about later, like maybe some more of the cultural aspects, making sure that they have a buyer who is willing to work with your business and absorb it, buy it in a way that works for the seller, right? They could have more of those types of conversations, or know that they've got, solid buyers, whether maybe it's private equity or people that they've dealt with before, that they'll know that their style and their approach to the business on a go-forward basis post-closing, and that might help connect the dots in a better way for somebody who's contemplating a sale.
Thank you.
Oh,
Um,
sorry, one other quick question. Apologize, it's Dean. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
Good, how you doing? Just a quick question for you. In your experience from the broker or the buyer's perspective, what do you feel, and sorry if I'm getting ahead of it, but what do you feel is the challenges that the seller has faced in trying to find a deal? So in other words, the financials not available or data not available, cultural fit, They say they're ready, but they're not? Like, what are the things that typically do the buyer and the broker run into where they're trying to make something happen, but it's challenging based on where the seller is at?
Yeah, I think all of those items that you brought up are important, and it goes to a seller's thought process and a seller's level of preparation, right? That was actually going to be one of the things I was just going to talk about right after this. But so I'll just jump to it. But in terms of getting to that decision, getting to a decision of I'm going to sell this business is not as simple as just I'm going to sell this business. Right? To me, in any transaction, right, it has nothing to do with home care or any particular industry. One of the most important things is the work that the seller does when they're getting ready to put it on the market. Right. Take it in a different context, right? You're going to sell your house. What's the natural thing to do? You're going to fix up the holes around in this around the sink. Maybe you'll put on you'll put on a slap on a coat of paint, right? You're going to do all those little things that are going to make your home present in the most efficient way, and you're going to have all your documents ready, right? And so that's the same thing with any business, right? You're gonna spend some time to do those things that a buyer is A, going to do, B, is going to want to know that you've done, right? When buyers walk through the door and you as a seller are sitting there with a full comprehensive understanding of your business, the great parts, the parts that are a little bit challenging, suggestions that you might have to overcome, certain challenges. I mean, that's only going to build the confidence in a buyer to know that, okay, this is somebody who's done what they need to do. And then that's going to translate to, let's say, if you get to the next stage and you're going to start to get into a due diligence phase of the arrangement where your documents are going to be prepared, you're going to have a data room, and you're going to have everything's going to be set up and it's going to be populated in a way that, again, continues to build the confidence that I'm getting straight, hopefully reliable information about this company, which means that in the lead up, and could be you as a seller, it could be you as a seller with your team that you've put together, which can include the broker. What are you doing? You're doing your own financial review. You're doing your own operations review. You're looking at it from every angle that a buyer is looking at it from, right? What do my files look like, right? Have I had any audits previously? What are the reasons for those audits? Am I going? You almost want to do mini surveys, right? Especially if we're talking in the home care context, where you could say, okay, I'm going to do a mini Department of Health survey. I'm going to do a mini Medicaid Inspector General survey. I'm going to do a mini Department of Labor survey, right? You're going to look at your files, your books, etc., to make sure that when you open them, you see the things that you're supposed to, right? And that can play into when we get to later the overall the importance to the seller based upon the structure of the deal that gets agreed to, right? Is the seller going to be walking into your existing company? Is the seller, right, in an equity sale, let's say, or is the buyer going to be walking into acquiring certain assets of the company? Sometimes the diligence part of it modifies itself based upon what the seller is anticipating. But I think that those types of things, organization and having the books and records of the business in a way that is presentable, understandable, and that the seller or the broker can articulate to one or more buyers is a big piece, and that sometimes gets in the way of building the momentum for the transaction.
Got it. Thank you.
With the team, just jumping back to assembling the team, I think one of the most important things is to give consideration to assembling the team because, as I mentioned earlier, the business owner who has spent however many years building its baby and creating a business that it now wants to hand off to somebody else. You're not familiar, and most of the times, I'll have the conversations with sellers, and they'll say, "Well, I've never done this before," and the answer is, of course, you probably haven't done it before because you've been focused on building a business, and now you've done it successfully, and you're ready to find somebody to hand it off to. So my message to people who are selling is put your team together, have confidence in them, and go back to running your business, right? I've had deals, of course, and especially in the home care industry in New York that seem to linger forever. And it has happened from time to time where buyers will come in and they'll see a dip, right? What happened to the numbers? could be a variety of reasons, could also be that the that the uh, that the seller took his eye off the ball a little, his or her eye off the ball a little bit, right? They're immersed in the sale process, and so maybe some of the day to day that they would otherwise be focused on is not getting the attention that it needs. So that's a to me, doing your best as a seller to maintain focus on your business and keep it at the level that it's supposed to be at, or even grow it, is a big priority. I think that should be placed at a very high on the list if you're thinking about selling. So you've gone through this. You've assembled your team, and then maybe you're ready to go, and you're saying, okay, let's maybe the broker's ready to bring it out to market. Whatever. You have to wind up with. We talked about a confidentiality agreement, right? You want to have certain things in place, because typically what's going to happen is that a potential buyer is going to want to get a little bit of the information, right? Now, one wouldn't necessarily be a full-blown due diligence review, but they want to get some of the information about the company. So you need to have your confidentiality agreement ready to go. Make sure that covers all types of information that they are going to be receiving. Make sure it covers interpretations and notes that they take on the information that you have, and make sure you've got good solid rights and recourse to the extent that there is something that happens to be disclosed inappropriately. Also, there are times, depending on the deal, you might want to bake in, and depending on the information that they're going to get, is whether or not there's language in there that would also create an agreement from a seller to not solicit, right? Sometimes, and I advise against it, but sometimes buyers get more information or see information about workers, workforce, etc., and you obviously don't want them to use any of the information inappropriately to impact your business in a negative way. And hopefully that's never the case, but we all know that things happen. The other thing that you're going to be thinking about is valuation, right? And we mentioned valuations are, sometimes a little bit off base. They don't necessarily have support for them. And we all have to deal with that, just like somebody wants to sell their house and they just say, unless I get X dollars, I'm not going to sell it. It might not be similar to the other businesses in the neighborhood, but houses in the neighborhood, but that's what they do. Oftentimes when it comes to valuation, we talk about EBITDA, right? There's depending on the types of transaction, we talk about a multiple of EBITDA as something that in all industries can be used as a way to get to a price. In many industries, there's kind of a range of multiple that can be applied to the EBITDA to come up with a purchase price. EBITDA stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And it's kind of used to strip out some of the variables and to have some constant in between companies that are in a particular industry. And so when we're talking about EBITDA, we talk about it on one level, but really ultimately what you are going to get to is what we would call a normalized EBITDA, right? So for example, if the owner of the business that you're looking to buy is taking out a $700,000 a year salary, but if you were to acquire that business, either that salary would be much reduced because you would put somebody else in there at a much lower rate, right? These are things that would be added back, right? They call add backs, right? You probably heard the term before, add backs. So if there are excessive personal expenses that are run through the business, salaries, additional family members who might be on the payroll, all of these things need to be looked at when you're ultimately coming to your EBITDA number to what we call normalize it, to get it to a number that you would then apply a multiple to. So one-time things that have happened shouldn't be included, right? Somebody got a loan during COVID. Those types of one-off types of things should be taken into account before you wind up getting to the next stage of thinking about applying a multiple. Gershon, I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, or if you.
I was actually thinking, I completely agree with what you're saying. And that, as I said before, it's really about what the future looks like. And what the future looks like means that you can't you can't have all sorts of distortions. So if the owner is taking a really large salary, then part of that is conceptually a distribution, something that you wouldn't have to pay the next person, and you adjust that. If they taking other money out, all those things do need to be adjusted. But on the flip side, you have, and this is what I actually wrote in my notes to ask you, there is this idea that sometimes people add everything back. Everything that the owner is taking out, they add back. And that's also not realistic, because this business is going to require someone to run it. And so if you completely ignore, let's say the owner was taking $1 million a year out and say, oh, well, that's an extra $1 million a year of profit. It's really not, because you're going to have to hire someone for a few $100,000 to run this business.
Agreed. Yeah, I think it's a let's say collaborative process, but I think it's a process that would have both buyer and seller involved to really to look through the different line items that you might come across to make a decision as to whether or not it is appropriate for an add back, or if it's something that is going to be an ongoing expense that would just continue and shouldn't go into the skew the EBITDA in a way that's inappropriate.
And there's really, there are other things as well. It's not just what the owner's taking out. A lot of it has to do with what is the environment that is what's going to be happening in the future. So if you have a changing regulatory environment, which is going to be more expensive, then very nice, the business made X until now every year, but it's going to make less maybe because we're going to have to spend more on dealing with regulatory stuff, hiring attorneys, dealing with lobbyists, whatever exactly it is. So it's really about understanding the future of the business and what the current business is likely to produce. And then, the buyer may choose sometimes to overpay because they think that they can improve the situation, or they may say, listen, the seller didn't figure it out. Who knows if I will? And there was an interesting line I once heard at a conference put on, I'll give a plug for Anshin, which is a large accounting firm in the Northeast. And I was at a conference they put on, it was for construction companies, but what they said is that everyone can agree on a multiple. That's no big deal. It's really about what number to apply to the multiple. So we all agree we're going to pay 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, but the devil is in the details, and the details are, what is this business really producing? And so we might all agree to pay 4 times that. That's an easy thing to agree to, but how much of what we think is going to happen is because of what I, the buyer, am doing versus what you, the seller, have provided.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that goes to the next thing I wanted to talk about is also and it depends. I will say that I don't see this level of analysis on every deal, but oftentimes, but on some level, it really has to be, because if we're thinking about, is there an applicable multiple that we should be applying and whatnot, what do you want to really get into what the quality of the earnings are, right? So that's an analysis that we would typically see on bigger deals, right? They're going to have their army of due diligence people walk through the door and really kick the tires on the business. But to understand the ongoing regularity of the income, of the revenue that you have, is important, right? And I'll tell people always, they'll say, well, I'm interested in this, or this is a valuation, I'm sorry, this is the multiple, or this is the price. And what is that really, what have you done to understand that, right? If in the home care context, if you were to say, okay, here's a business that's generating, X millions of dollars of revenue, and run your numbers, that's great. But if you were to dig deeper and say that, well, I'm generating X dollars of revenue, let me look and see what is causing me to generate that, right? Right now, maybe I have a case mix that has higher hours because everybody that I am serving, or a great high percentage of who I'm serving, are 94 years old. What does that do for you, right? You might see these numbers, but if you're paying a lot of money and you're trying to figure out what your rate of return is going to be and how long it's going to take you to get to a certain spot, then I don't know I think you would be much more confident if you saw that you had cases that, and the patients that you were caring for were 75 years old, and you would think that you had a much longer runway with them to generate revenue, versus somebody who's 94, 95, and they're high hour cases because they need all of these extra services, and who knows how much longer that's going to last. So the idea of digging down deeper into the demographics that you're acquiring is really, to me, a critical piece of understanding what you're stepping into and what the expectation might be as opposed to just blindly coming out with a number, dollar figure per case, or just not taking that extra step to understand, what the basis is for revenue and the earnings of the company. So let's just say we've gotten to a point, we've had some conversations with somebody who might be interested in acquiring the business. You might say, okay, well, what is the next step? Typically, it doesn't have to happen all the time. Typically, you might enter into a letter of intent or a term sheet, right? And the letter of intent, as you may know, typically a letter of intent is, for the most part, a non-binding document. It's really done to crystallize the understanding between the parties, right? You have an agreement in principle with somebody, and you're going to say, okay, I'm going to, based on ongoing due diligence, etc., here's what I'm going to pay you. Here's how I'm going to pay it to you. It carves out a period of time for me to really dig in and do due diligence. If I am a buyer, I would typically want, there are a couple of provisions in a letter of intent that are, typically binding, right? One would be, let's say, confidentiality. Excuse me. Another would be exclusivity, no shop exclusivity. End of meeting poll. Okay.
It's
Um,
here. Let me clarify. It's not an end of meeting poll. We usually put it up at
Okay.
the end. This time we decided we're putting it up in the middle. But we're still going to be going, and then we're going to leave a few minutes at the end for Q&A.
Okay. So
But to clarify for all of our guests, not the end of the meeting. We still got lots of
Okay.
more good insights coming.
So the letter of intent would have those types of provisions, right? You as a buyer, you would want to have a binding provision that says that during my due diligence period, maybe a little bit longer than my due diligence period, that the seller is not looking to also attract other buyers and compete with me, etc. So you'd have an exclusivity, right? The only person that the seller is going to be dealing with is the buyer, right? Let me do my due diligence. I'm spending money. I have my team coming in, etc. There can be challenges with that, what it really means. But at a minimum, you would say that that's something that a buyer would want, is somebody to commit to the exclusive negotiations between the parties, right? In the letter of intent, you may, a lot of times you do, come out and describe the type, right? The structure of the deal. Am I buying your assets? Am I buying the equity of the business? Is it a merger, which we don't see all that much? But you may give some thought to what's the most efficient way for me to accomplish this transaction. Is it an asset deal? Is it a stock deal? Purchase price, like I said, or the formula for it, exclusivity, timing for due diligence, right? And your due diligence, right, that can go depending on, the size of the business and how in depth that somebody wants to get on the due diligence. If you're really bringing in a team and you're doing quality of earnings, due diligence could take 90 days, right? It could take a nice chunk of time to get it done in a coherent way. That can take shorter than that if it's a smaller business, and sometimes people come in and they just want to see, if you're experienced in an industry, you might just want to see these 5 things, and you might think that tells you enough about the selling company to continue to move forward, and that it validates the pricing that you were thinking about. But from a diligence standpoint, if I'm a buyer, I want to do everything that I can to get as into the weeds about this business as I can. Right, so you're going to look into the regulatory pieces, compliance pieces, employee-related issues. Is there a union involved? Are they complying with the wage and hour requirements that we know in New York are get a little bit complicated? Are you looking at all of their, clinical, their personnel files? You want to really, if you happen to be an existing agency, and this is I'll say a strategic acquisition, and you have a team that's familiar with the operations and how an agency or company should be working, you want them to step in and really really scrub through files that they get to understand if there are going to be exposures. Because keep in mind, and again, depending on how we do it, might depend on your level of exposure. And what I mean by that is, if you're structuring it as an asset purchase, it is one of the reasons why you structure it as an asset purchase, is that if somebody knocks on your door and says that they have some kind of a claim, you'd like to be able to point them across the street to the seller, to the company that you just bought the business from, and say, no, I didn't take that. that's a liability that remains with, you know, XYZ company, and I'm not that company, right? So that's a great thing to be able to do. If you're buying the equity of the business, you own that business. So if I'm buying the equity of XYZ company, and after I close and I own the business, somebody knocks on my door and says, XYZ, I want to sue XYZ company, that's your company. So you're not able to point them across the street and say, go talk to the former owners of this business. You have to take on that obligation, so to speak, knowing that your documents will allow you to seek indemnification from the seller, the person that you bought the business from, because it would be their responsibility. But it creates a more complicated process, right? It's not you pointing somebody across the street and having them go away. You have to deal with something and then try to work through the issues of your document and your indemnification rights from the former owner of that business. Um, I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a sec. So in due diligence, right, you're going to look at the compliance issues, like I said, clinical litigation, right? One of the things that we do, is early on, if we're a buyer, is that we're going to run searches on the seller's company. Do they have open litigations? Do they have liens? Do they have, are they, is somebody affiliated with the business? Have they filed for bankruptcy? There are a whole variety of different things that could come up that would be of interest to a buyer when they're doing their due diligence. Oftentimes people, if I'm a buyer, I might want to interview people in the business. If I'm representing a seller, I do my absolute best to try to push that off. Right. One of the things that we're always concerned about, especially since it's such a long process, is, have I, as a seller, have I made the field of people who know what's going on appropriately small, right? I mean, we don't necessarily want word getting out on the street that XYZ company is for sale. And what does that do? It creates fear in your employee base. It creates potential that business starts to drop off. It just creates a lot of noise around the transaction. So you need to be able to do your best to narrow the field and only have people who have a real need to know what's going on, have them know, and to let them know of the importance of the maintaining the confidentiality, because this again can become a big issue as you move forward, and of course, because we have New York is such a long period of time to get to closing of a transaction, it really can have an impact. So it's really something that we like to focus on and tell people to, make sure the confidentiality is that everybody's aware of the confidentiality. The other thing that's important, I'll put it into due diligence, but I think it flows through the entire process, even and begins at the very beginning. We often have brokers, you'll have lawyers, you'll have accountants, right? And sometimes, especially if the principals are not necessarily as well versed or experienced with the transaction, so everything flows through the team. I don't. Yes, I understand the importance of that, but I think the most important thing that sometimes gets delayed is the discussion between the principals, right? I think, and especially because we've got, a long period of time in this particular industry, but again, this transcends home care, healthcare. This is within any transaction, is what's the connection between the owner of the business and the buyer? And I place a premium on that, because I think that they need to understand what, the buyer needs to articulate future plans, what they're intending to do, especially in the way we structure the deals in home care in New York. There really needs to be an understanding of what the expectation is day to day once we sign our documents and until we get to closing, what's going on with the businesses. And I think that sooner that level of communication is done, right, between those principals, the better. And that they really should get comfortable with each other, build trust with each other, that they know exactly what's going to happen once we sign our documents. Asset, we talked about asset versus equity. Asset, hopefully, right, there can be issues with the ability to say, no, I just bought those assets, and go across the street and talk to the seller, right? There's concepts, called successor liability, where, a somebody who's coming after a business might try to link the two and basically say, no, even though you bought the assets, I'm still coming after you. Sometimes governmental entities can, do that. And then you have to, go back and forth with your indemnification, right? If you're doing an asset transaction in New York, and we may not have enough time to get into all of this from a home care standpoint, there are ways that
Next.
you can circumvent the change of ownership application process and hopefully get it done on a little bit of a quicker basis, giving recognition to the Department of Health's dysfunction. If you're doing an equity transaction in New York for home care, you're going to wind up with a CON or a change of ownership application, and unfortunately, those have been taking conservatively around 2 years to get processed. Maybe they might get through quicker. We're hoping that in the next agenda for the Public Health and Health Planning Council, that they've opened the floodgates a little bit, because as it stands right now, they've typically been putting changes of ownership on the council agenda at a rate of under 10 per meeting, and there's probably at this point over 150 applications that are sitting there. So it's a little bit of a crazy process.
Michael,
Yes.
I just want to tell you it's about 6-7 minutes till noon, and we have a bunch of questions in the chat. So
Okay, so let's go. So I listen, as
I'm
happens
sure
frequently, you don't wind up getting through everything. I'm happy, of course, to talk to anybody that wants to connect afterwards to give any more information or has questions, but I'm happy to see that there are questions. Do you want me to look at those questions that are in the chat?
sure. Or if you want, I can read them either way.
Whatever.
All right. First one, to add what Michael was speaking to, think of due diligence. Think of the due diligence you would do if you wanted to buy. What would you like to see? Do the due diligence with experts. Libby says that broker, that I guess what we're talking about is where the broker comes in to help through the steps to prepare. As a business broker, that is part of the job. And she talks about how they help you pre-qualify for SBA loans. Here, question. As a potential buyer, can you discuss the differences between buying an existing agency versus attempting to be granted a new license from the DOH? I think we were just
Yeah, I think that
discussing.
unfortunately at this point, since after the end of the moratorium, the new application that came out, the ability to simply apply for pay your, I think it's $2,000 and submit a initial licensure application are very, very, very small. What they've done is they've basically shut that down, other than if you are able to establish that there is a need, right? I'll qualify that a little bit, right? There are certain counties that, when they came out in 2022, that they said that there was need. I don't know that they've updated that county list, but in theory, if you go to those counties, and you might imagine that those are not the counties that a lot of people want to be in, right? They're the outskirts of the 62 counties that are in New York State. I think when they came out with the needs, I think it was 20 counties had no need and 42 had need. So I guess I'll take that back a little bit. If you wanted to go up to, I'm not sure this is even one of them, Cayuga County, and open an agency there, you, in theory, could submit an application and they would review that. If you are doing it in a place where there is no need, you can submit it, but you have to overcome the presumption that there is no need. What they want you to do is articulate in your application that you, based on data, right? You need to include the data in your application that is going to justify that there is this population that is underserved and that is waiting to get treatment, and that there are no other licensed agencies in Nassau County that could provide this service. And if they are persuaded that your data is accurate and there is a need and there is an underserved population of people that is sitting home and not getting care, then it's possible that they will allow your application to go through. So that's the issues that you deal with from a new license from DOH. Buying an existing agency, if the existing agency is functioning and let's say it has over 25 cases and you want to buy it, you can avoid, when you're your application for a change of ownership, you can avoid a review on a needs basis. So sometimes people will look to find something that's operating at that level. Sometimes people will build into their purchase that we're not going to submit the application for the change of ownership until the company has built up to over 25. And those, those get through, like I mentioned, the timeline for those is incredibly long. So it's not saying that they're off the table and they can't get done. It's just taking a very long time. Let's see.
Thank you. We had a question here about state and city liabilities on the business.
How do you handle these? Well, if are we saying that there are liabilities? I mean, from my perspective, liabilities would hopefully be addressed as early as possible, right? If that means that there's an amount of purchase price or that the seller has to address them and clear them, right? That's the best outcome. It becomes a bit of a challenge when you're dealing with it if that's not possible, right? How are you going to deal with that? Because the state or city agency or that has lien or something, that's what I assume you're talking about, is not going away, and they're going to look to the company which they have asserted the lien against as the company that's responsible. This even happens if you're in an asset deal, right? Because what can happen, right? You can see liens and judgments that are filed that may trickle into the assets that a company has or have coverage on an asset. And so what's the ability for the selling company to transfer its assets, right? If you're a buyer, you want to make sure that the assets that you're acquiring are free from any liens, encumbrances, mortgages, whatever it might be. You want clean title you want to be able to get clean title to those assets. So it's a challenge, right? It's a challenge. You want to extinguish those as early in the process as possible.
All right, we have a couple more questions. Michael, do you have a few more minutes?
Of course.
All right, so everyone, we normally wind this down at 12. You're all welcome to leave, but you are also invited to stay. We'll go through a few more questions, and we'll probably wind down by around 12:05. If you haven't filled out the poll, please do that on your way out. And for anyone leaving now, thank you for joining us. Michael, thank you for hosting an amazing event.
My pleasure.
All
Thank
right.
you, everyone.
Let's see. As a potential seller, what is the usual customary multiple once you have an accurate value?
It's a little bit hard. I think that goes to the quality of earnings or whatnot. I mean, we've seen more recently that you might see a range of between 4 and I guess it's hard to say. I've seen valuations as high, multiples as high as 10 or 11. But I
On
think if
EBITDA or as
yeah,
seller discretionary?
yeah, and on EBITDA.
Wow.
So
In
wow, wow,
recent,
10.
that seemed like a very high
Wow,
multiple
10 is probably a little bit longer ago.
with lower interest, back with lower interest rates.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'm not sure about that one, but it's a little bit longer ago. So I don't know if you're sitting probably in the 4 to 7 range. I think that's can be, you can say it with a straight face. So maybe. As a business broker, I tell sellers we don't sell potential, we sell profit. I like that.
Good.
I like that. Um,
Next one's a question. Since healthcare is state reliant, do you recommend getting a healthcare attorney from that particular state?
I think that is helpful. I think it is to be able to navigate through. I know that we work primarily in New York, but we have experience in other states, and right, we work in a regulatory environment, so we kind of know the directions and the issues that we need to confront because we work in New York, which is probably the most regulated or one of the most regulated. So in terms of the ability to navigate through, if it probably makes more sense to have somebody who is familiar and like that's what they do. Like I would say, if you find somebody that this is their bread and butter and this is what they do, and you as a client want to get an answer when you put in a call and say, is it the answer yes or no? Then I think you have to. If they're a firm like us, which is fully capable of doing a lot of work in other places, we don't always off the tip of our head. If you called me up about a New York issue, I'll give you the answer. If you're calling me up about an issue in another state, I'll say, all right, I understand the question. We need to look into the answer. So and sometimes people decide, hey, you know what, we work with you, or you work with your trusted advisor, and you're comfortable with the relationship, and that's the most important thing, because you don't want to try to figure out a relationship with new counsel or somebody new to the game. So it's possible. So
All right. We got one more question in chat, it looks like. What do you say to a potential buyer that has a seller with a license but no insurance contracts in New York State? Is it worth buying without contracts?
Well, I think that's dependent on the buyer. I mean, you might, like we were talking about earlier, you might look at it as as a taxi medallion, right? It's something that has value just because it has value. But like I said, if you're looking to start a business and you're looking to get contracts with the managed long-term care plans, those, unless you have a good relationship with a plan, and you think that's going to be able to leverage off of that into contracts, I think that the contracting environment is very challenging now. I think that the MLTCs are getting squeezed, right? We see people getting termination notices of their contracts, and that's not an infrequent occurrence. And these are established people that have cases, but the caseload that they have is minimal, right? It's not that they've got hundreds and hundreds of cases with a particular plan. So plans are, their interest is potentially in consolidating also, right? So they don't have to deal with, whatever the number is, 100 different providers, that they want to deal with 75. So, they want to consolidate their caseload amongst ones that they think can handle the extra census, and that's what they want to do. So in terms of going out and saying, I want to get a contract, it's hard. So I think something that doesn't have a contract is obviously, you've got those challenges built in the future if you want to try to get them. So I think that would play into the value of it, but of the company. But again, if you want it, and the only ones that are out there are overpriced and they don't have contracts, then that's the market. So you might have to adjust your thinking.
All right. Thank you. Any final questions, jump in. Otherwise, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Michael, for
My pleasure.
teaching
Thanks
us
for the
a lot of
opportunity.
really important things. Again, everyone, please take the survey, just taking a minute. Michael, you don't have to take it, but for the rest of the people, take a minute. It would be very helpful. And either way, hope to see you back again sometime soon. And if you need an attorney, reach out to Michael or reach out to us, and we'll put you in touch. And if you need a CFO, reach out to us.
Sounds good. Thanks, Gershon. Thanks, everybody.
Michael.
Thank you all. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye-bye.